All right, so today I wanted to start by bringing up a simple quote that Kevin Sorbo pointed out here, and he just says, "Control through fear," and that's basically the entire playbook when it comes to this whole situation. Is that it's control through fear. The entirety of the mainstream media and the government's approach to this whole situation is to keep people scared. That is the entirety of the approach, and the reason why they do that is simple because when you're in a scared, stressed state, it's easier to sell you on, the great reset, like things like that, right? So that is why they're doing this kind of stuff. That is the way that they can get you to the whole, oh, we're not going back to normal till who knows who when. We may never go back to normal, right? So this is how they get people to radically alter the way they live their lives for no good reason, but because they're so propagandized and scared, that's how they get people to do this, right? And that's like I said, that's the entirety of the mainstream media's approach on this is that depending on how you report on this kind of stuff is that you could report on things in a way that is accurate but still very misleading, and that is how the mainstream media does this kind of stuff is that they're not necessarily flat out lying. I mean, they're lying about some things, but they're not necessarily lying about a lot of this stuff. They're simply being incredibly misleading, right? And that one of the ways that they do it is, I mean, the first one being is the case numbers, right? But the problem you have to realize with the case numbers is that a lot of, I mean, I'm going to get into it very soon in the next point, but the case numbers, I mean, they're a lot of times they're false positives, and number two, if they're asymptomatic, it doesn't really matter, right? And they don't tell people that, like they don't tell people that. They assume that every case is an opportunity for a super spreader, right? And every case is, you're going to kill grandma if you are test positive and go visit them, right? Which again is it's incredibly misleading because the data showed all along that the only people that are at risk of spreading, especially to a large degree, are people who are symptomatic, right? And again, the other problem with the testing too is that a lot of them are false positives, especially in younger populations, right? This is another thing we're seeing now. We're having these schools that are being shut down. I mean, in Alberta, it's 7 to 12, they're shut down. But what they don't realize is that many of those are false positives. The numbers show like half of them are, right? So you got 100 positive tests and 50 of them are false positives, and of the other 50 that actually are positive tests, the majority of those are probably asymptomatic. So you have 100 positive tests, and the reality is that maybe what, 10, maybe 20 of them are ones you actually need to be worried about, if that. I've never seen reliable numbers on that, and the fact that we haven't, I think, just goes to show that it's not as bad as what we would think. Because if it was as bad as what the mainstream media would have you think, that's what they would be bringing up. And when it comes to the death numbers too, this is something they've been pointing out here now. And Alberta, you have Hinshaw and all these people that are coming out and saying, "Oh, we have X number of cases and X number of new deaths, and this is the worst thing in the world." And what they don't tell you is that number one, about 750 people die a day in Canada, right? So you have maybe, what do we have now? Maybe 50, 100 tops people that are dying a day with this thing. So again, the vast majority of people that are dying with this, they're not people that are dying from the virus. The vast majority of people that are dying of other causes. All cause mortality is not up this year. But I would bet money that if you polled, CBC viewers, that if you asked them, is all cause mortality up this year, 95% of them would say yes, even though it isn't, right? And here's another thing too, that they're all worried about the hospitalizations, right? The hospitals are going to be overwhelmed. They've been telling us that for 9 months now. Um, and they've never been overwhelmed. And I don't even think they've been close. There has been some individual hospitals that have been at capacity, but again, the other thing that they don't tell you about that, again, they're noticing a pattern here, how they never seem to tell you the whole story. Hospitals are designed to run at capacity, right? They're not designed to run at 50, 60, 70% capacity. They're designed to run close to 100%, if not sometimes even over, right? It was a normal thing. It was not out of the realm. It was not the craziest thing in the world for a hospital to be at 100, 105, 110% capacity, right? But when it happens now, everyone's all paranoid, even though nobody was paranoid when that happened in the past. And again, another thing they don't tell you, more people were hospitalized from the flu 2 years ago than from the virus this year. Again, so it's not necessarily that they're lying, they're just being incredibly misleading. And that's how they do it. Again, control through fear. The entirety of the approach when it comes to this situation is control through fear, because they're trying to sell people on the Great Reset and all these kind of things. And again, people, some, we have these idiots talking about, oh, the Great Reset is a conspiracy theory, even though, you know, Justin Trudeau talked about it on, national television, and the video's been viewed millions of times, maybe even tens of millions. I haven't checked. And you have the Klaus Schwab, who literally wrote a book about it. Like, again, like, how much more out in the open do they have to be? And this is just the stupidity of the average person, that you have people that can admit things on live TV, write books about it, and yet much of the population still thinks that it's a conspiracy theory, right? Like, just imagine if, Trump admitted on national television that he colluded with the Russians, and not only that, wrote a book about it, and yet they still called it a conspiracy theory. Like, just imagine how insane they would consider Trump supporters to be. Like, it would be off the charts. But again, they do it, and it's no big deal. So again, control through fear, an excellent way of putting it. That is about in as much of a nutshell as you can possibly put this whole situation. And again, speaking of the testing, this is from Paul Mitchell here, and he says, if someone is tested by PCR as positive when a threshold of 35 cycles or higher is used, the probability of said person infected is less than 3%, and the probability that said result is a false positive is 97%. Game over, case numbers are fake. Now, again, I'm not sure just how legitimate these kind of things are, because, again, I don't want to go off just one article. But again, the one thing that we do know for sure, and even people like Fauci have admitted this, so there's no conspiracy theory here, is that whenever you have whenever you have these cycles that are high, especially 35, Fauci has said like 25. I've heard many experts on top of that have said anything over 25 to 30 at tops is completely meaningless. And every single Canadian province uses a minimum of 35. So again, this is something that people need to realize, is you have Alberta coming out with 1,500 new cases, or whatever we're averaging these days, and they don't realize that probably half of those are false positives, and of the rest of them, the vast majority of those you don't need to be worried about. We have 1,500 new cases, and maybe 50 to 100 of them are actually legitimate cases we need to be worried about. And again, is the mainstream media going to tell you that? No. Because again, people probably wondering, well, what is their motivation? Well, their motive, like, if the mainstream media came out and was honest with people from day, right now, number one, they would lose some of their funding, right? Because their a lot of their funding, I mean, namely CBC, is dependent upon propping up the government, right? If they were to come out and question the government, then, like, again, like, it would be like, if let's just say, big oil was funding, some scientists, right? And the scientists put out information contradictory to what they wanted. Well, guy's probably going to lose funding, right? So again, it's the same thing that goes for the mainstream media. Is they're going to do whatever is best in the government's do whatever is best for the government's interest, and what's best for the government's interest is to have the government have as much power as possible. If they were honest with people, they would say, yeah, it's not that big of a deal. It's slightly worse than the flu. We should be pretty much back to normal, maybe with some restrictions on nursing homes. That's about the only legitimate restrictions at this point that we should have. Mask mandates are completely pointless. Lockdowns are completely pointless. These social gathering limits completely pointless. It's very funny. Like, you have China they're clearly just screwing with everyone. I mean, they've clearly been screwing with everyone all along, but now it's very obvious, and that they have, they're sending, I don't know who would be doing it, because obviously they would have to have approval from the state because it's a communist country, but they've had multiple, viral videos of like massive, like 10, 20,000 people, like raves, like no masks, no, so nothing. just screwing with everyone, like just screwing with everyone. Like clearly, this is they either completely screwed completely played the rest of the world, or simply is like, yeah, this is going to get under control. Let's simply make this appear like it's a lot worse than it actually is, in an attempt to have the states mainly, because again, that China is competing with the states to be the world's superpower, right? So I think it was simply them just trying to screw over the American economy, knowing that a large percentage of the American population, same goes for Canada, is a bunch of complete zombie idiots, and they'll believe whatever the TV tells them. So again, they reported it as, people were dying in the streets, and people were being locked in their homes because it's so serious, and the hospitals are overwhelmed. And and again, they reported incredibly low case numbers in China, like incredibly low. And I most of the time we thought, though, they're just lying, but maybe they're not. Maybe they're not. Maybe their testing was actually accurate testing. Maybe they had, testing that actually was accurate, and because of that, their numbers appeared to be a lot lower than they actually were. And maybe they were telling the truth because, again, they're lying about something. Either they're lying about the virus being as bad as it was, which is what it appears to be, I think, from anybody with a brain, or they were lying about the case numbers. So again, either way, they were lying about something. But I think it's personally, I think that the evidence is rather clear that they were lying about the severity of the virus. Because again, have we had people dying in the streets in North America? No, we haven't had any of that. And in fact, like, what is it, like 97% of people? I think it's only like 200 people outside of nursing homes have died. So again, it doesn't make any sense. I think it's very clear that they were simply using it as an opportunity to catch up with the states economically. Again, the state's economy did suffer pretty hard, and even though it appears to be doing relatively well right now, it's largely a house of cards, and I think they know that. So yeah, I mean, long story short, the PCR tests are completely unreliable. I think anybody who hears 1,500 new cases and is all panicked, I think is a complete idiot, because they have no idea what they're talking about. Because if they did, they would understand, yeah, it's 1,500 new cases, but you have to realize that the vast majority of those are either false positives or cases we don't need to be worried about. And this is from Brian Lilly, and he says, well, millions of private sector workers lost their jobs due to layoffs. New information from the Fed shows tens of thousands were put on paid leave, didn't lose a penny due to the pandemic. Are we really all in this together? Again, this is one of the biggest lies coming out of this whole situation. Oh, we're all in this together. Well, the reality is that we're not. And I'm really tired of this kind of garbage, because we have sectors that have largely been unaffected. Like, I mean, teachers, perfect example. I don't always like to pick on teachers, but they're a perfect example of this kind of stuff. And that, has their life really been affected at all by this? Yeah, they maybe have to do a little bit more work. There's some regulations they have to follow, but at the end of the day, they're still getting paid the same as they were before, right? They're still getting paid the exact. In fact, their life is easier in a lot of ways. Like, it's a little bit easier to teach over Zoom than it is in person, right? And again, not to mention too, like, oh, we got to spend all this time getting our lessons ready and all this garbage. But again, like, at the end of the day, you're not actually doing a whole heck of a lot. Like, public schools don't do nearly as much as what people would have you think. and and this is the thing too, that if they did, then why in the world would the government just call everything off last spring? Right? They just called everything off. If it was so important, they would figure out a way to get it done, but they didn't, because at the end of the day, I think everyone knows. I mean, most people won't admit it, but everybody knows that it's really all not that important. Like, the vast majority of the lessons you learn in life are through teaching yourself, or actual, like, on the job stuff. But anyway, like, as far as this goes too, like, how are people okay with this? Like, I really don't understand how people constantly complain about money and how things aren't fair and all this kind of stuff, but yet it happens like this and nobody cares. And I think the reality is that you have the left, who the entirety of their worldview is, we need to expand the government. And again, paying people to not work, especially when they're public sector workers, that is the wet dream of leftists, right? That is the wet dream, that you get paid not to work, right? That is the wet dream. So again, I think that's why they don't care about it. And I think the reason why the private sector work, I mean, a lot of them are up in arms over stuff like this, but I think the reason that they don't is a lot of them are just powerless, right? They're just powerless, and that and I think the biggest problem too is that they didn't they waited till it was too long to they waited till it was too late to speak up. I think a lot of people were really asleep at the wheel on this kind of stuff, and that a lot of people knew that it was BS pretty much from day one, but they didn't speak up. So again, I think that's a big issue, but again, just more craziness. And the last thing I wanted to bring up, again, speaking of wasted money, this is from Blacklock's reporter saying high hopes for shaky Crown Infrastructure Bank, says Catherine McKenna after completed zero projects to date with 35 billion in funding. Tom Quiggin, 35 billion in funding, billion with a B, and no completed projects. Now again, um, what is going on? Like, and here's the thing, like, why aren't people more up in arms about this kind of stuff? You have like people complaining about like the slightest, of improprieties, like, some politician embezzles like $50,000, and keeps it for themselves, which is a bad thing. They should be punished. They should have to pay it back. But again, you have stuff like this, which is a much larger amount, and yet no one's up in arms. Like, no one's up in arms. It's just very astounding. I think it's incredibly astounding. And the other thing too is that where's the mainstream media on this one? Like, where's the mainstream media on this one? Like, just imagine if this kind of stuff happened under Trump, right? Like, they would be all over him. They would be all over him. But again, it happens under Justin Trudeau and Catherine McKenna, and nobody cares. And I think the reality of this is that I don't even know if a lot of this stuff is necessarily bad intentions. I think that the Trudeau government clearly has a lot of people that are incredibly incompetent working for them. I mean, Freeland is Exhibit A. McKenna, I think, is another very good example. But their strategy seems to be, and the people at the top definitely they have their bad intentions, but a lot of the people they surround themselves with are just people that are just incompetent. Because again, if you have bad intentions, the goal would be to surround yourself with people that are incompetent, because number one, they're probably not smart enough to recognize your bad intentions. Number two, they're probably easy to take advantage of. And number three, it'll be very easy to use them as a scapegoat when things go wrong. I mean, look at Justin Trudeau, perfect example of this. You have Jody Wilson-Raybould and all these people that he's thrown under the bus for his own improprieties, right? So again, I think it's just textbook, government corruption here, and yet nobody really cares. It's very astounding, I guess. But anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about today. If you liked the video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already. Make sure you check out those links below. Follow me on those other platforms. If you want to donate, you can do that as well. Again, I appreciate any donations, but at the very least, just hit that like and subscribe if you haven't already.